The crowd split before he even entered it. 4 men in black moved through Nampodong Market like a wall, and nobody looked at them directly. Sellers found something urgent to adjust on their stalls. A man carrying oranges changed direction without explanation. Even the noise seemed to lower itself. Walking in the center of those 4 men was Kwon Seung-hyun, hands in his coat pockets, jaw set, eyes moving like a man who had already calculated every exit before he walked in. He wasn't looking at anyone. He never did. Then he stopped. Not because something threatened him, not because anyone called his name. He stopped because of a sound. A child was singing. Not well, not even the right words. Just a small voice making up a melody that didn't belong to any song in the world. Humming something between a Ghanaian rhythm and a Korean lullaby, mixing them together without knowing they were 2 different things. Seung-hyun turned his head. She was sitting on an overturned crate beside a fruit stall. 6 years old at most. Her hair was natural, tight, coily, 4C texture pulled into 2 puffs on top of her head and held with yellow rubber bands. Her skin was warm brown, deeper than her father's ever was, lighter than her mother's. Her nose was broad and soft. Her lips were full. And at the corners of her slightly almond-shaped eyes, a constellation of freckles sat across her nose, like someone had been deliberate about placing them there. She had a half-eaten mango in her right hand and juice running all the way down to her elbow. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching a butterfly that had landed on a pineapple 3 inches from her face, and she was whispering something to it. In Korean, then in English, then in something that sounded like neither. One of his guards stepped forward. "Boss, we're all ready." Seung-hyun raised one hand. The guard went silent. He walked toward her. The little girl still hadn't noticed. She was tracking the butterfly with her whole face, the way only children could. Total devotion, like it was the most important event on earth. Then she looked up. She looked directly at Kwon Seung-hyun. This man, the entire underworld of Busan either answered to or feared. And she did not flinch. She tilted her head. "Why-o?" "Why?" Seung-hyun crouched down. Right there, in the middle of Nampodong Market. One of the most dangerous men in South Korea folded himself to the eye level of a 6-year-old girl with mango juice on her elbow. His guards looked at each other. None of them moved. He looked at her face for a long moment. Something happened behind his eyes that had no name. His chest tightened. His throat worked. She has the same gap between her front teeth. He swallowed. "What is your name?" Korean first, then slowly in English. The girl considered him, took another bite of mango, chewed it thoughtfully. "Jane," she said. "Jane Kim." He closed his eyes for half a second. Kim. When he opened them, she was still watching him, completely unbothered, juice now threatening her elbow. "And you?" she asked. One of the guards made a strangled sound. "Kwon Seung-hyun," he said. Jane repeated it carefully, splitting each syllable like she was filing it somewhere important. Then she held out her mango toward him. An offering. "Do you want some? My yama says mango is good for sad people." Everything in his chest went still. He was always careful. 11 years of making sure nothing showed on his face. This child had read him in 40 seconds. He reached out, very slowly, took the piece of mango from her hand. He didn't eat it. He just held it. "Jane." His voice came out lower than intended. "Yeah. Will you?" He stopped, started again. The words felt strange because he had never said them to anyone. Not once, in his entire life. "Will you be my daughter? Please." Silence. Jane stared at him. You don't have one? No. She thought about this with great seriousness. Her small forehead creased. Did she go away? His jaw tightened. Just once. Yes. Jane nodded, the way children nodded when they understood things they weren't supposed to yet. Then she looked past him toward the stall, where a woman had appeared, and frozen. Here is what you need to know about Joyce Mensah. She was 31 years old, full-figured, with round cheeks and full arms and the kind of solid, warm presence that made people feel like she had always been standing wherever she was standing. She wore her hair wrapped high in a yellow and green cloth that matched nothing and somehow matched everything. She had come to Busan from Accra, Ghana, when she was 24, following a Korean man named Kim Tae-young, a man she loved completely and who had left anyway. Not because he wanted to, because his family and soul had applied a pressure that he was never strong enough to resist. He packed quietly on a Tuesday, left her with a 2-year-old daughter, Elise, and a surname that now belonged to them both. Joyce had stayed. Not because she had nowhere to go, because Jane was already Korean in her bones, in her language, in her taste for doenjang jigae, and the way she bowed to elders without being taught. Busan was Jane's home, and Joyce Mensah was not a woman who ran. She had built her fruit stall from a single borrowed crate, and 7 years of showing up before sunrise. She was not afraid of hard things. But she knew that face. Everyone in this part of Busan who sold anything, moved anything, or owed anything to anyone, knew that face. And he was crouched in front of her daughter. Joyce stepped forward the way you moved around something you didn't fully understand. Carefully, without sudden gestures. Jane. Iyama! Jane turned, completely unbothered. This man doesn't have a daughter. Can I be his daughter? Can he be my appa? Joyce's mouth opened, closed. Seung-hyun stood. He was much taller standing. His expression shifted into something neutral and careful. The face he showed the world, not the face he had been showing her daughter 30 seconds ago. Kwon Seung-hyun, he said, and dipped his head. Not submission, measured acknowledgement. I know who you are, Joyce said. Her Ghanaian accent was present and unhiding. Her voice was steady because she made it steady. And my daughter is not something I give away. He said nothing. Jane, come. Jane did not come. She was looking at Seung-hyun with her head tilted again. Why did she go away? Every one of his guards found something important to look at on the ground. She didn't choose to, he said quietly. Did you cry? Jane. Joyce's voice cracked slightly on the name. Men can cry, Jane said, in the tone of a child who had decided to educate the world on this matter. My Yama says that. Seung-hyun turned and looked at Joyce. Joyce looked back at him. For one moment, nothing was transactional between them. No power, no fear, no calculation. Just two people who had both lost someone, standing in a fruit market while a 6-year-old held them both accountable. Then Jane slid off her crate, walked to Seung-hyun, and took his hand. I'll be your daughter, she announced, but only sometimes, because I already have an ama. He came back on the 3rd day. He told himself he was checking on a supplier 3 stalls down from the fruit section. He almost believed it until Jane spotted him from 30 meters away and waved with her whole arm, like his arrival was the answer to a plan she had been running. 3 men near him physically flinched at the volume of his name coming out of a child. Yellow dress today, white sandals, a fresh bandage on her knee from something Joyce had clearly not fully approved of. Jane climbed off her crate and stood in front of him with her arms crossed. You didn't come yesterday. I was busy. Busy with what? One of his guards coughed into his fist. Work, Seung-hyun said. Jane thought about this. My Amma works all day too, but she still comes home. He had no answer for that. He hadn't thought of anywhere as home in a long time, and this child kept using the word like it was simple. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the stall without waiting for a response. Joyce was at the back, sorting a new papaya delivery. And when she looked up and saw him, something crossed her face. Not quite fear anymore. More like a woman discovering that a situation she thought she had calculated was larger than the numbers she'd used. She invited me, Seung-hyun said. Joyce looked at Jane. Jane looked completely innocent. You want mango? Joyce said. Flat. A transaction, not a welcome. But she was already reaching for one. Yes, Jane answered on his behalf. This became the pattern. He came every 2 or 3 days. Sometimes in the morning, twice in the afternoon, when the light over the market was low and orange, and the vendors were packing slowly. He never stayed long. He never explained why he came. Jane always found him immediately, like she had a sense for it. And Joyce watched all of it with the quiet attention of a woman who was gathering information before she made a decision. She noticed things. She noticed that he listened to Jane with complete focus. Not the distracted half-attention adults usually gave children, but real listening, the kind where your whole face shifted with what was being said. She noticed that his guards relaxed slightly when Jane was talking, like even they needed the interruption. She noticed that he never touched anything at the stall without asking first, never raised his voice, never made Joyce feel like the space around her stall belonged to him, the way everything else in this market quietly did. She also noticed the two men. It was a Tuesday, mid-morning. She was stacking mangosteens when she felt it, that specific prickling awareness that came from years of being a woman alone in a city that wasn't hers. Two men at the edge of the market, not shopping, standing at the corner where the stalls ended and the side street began, watching her stall. Jane was 3 feet away, rearranging oranges. Joyce kept stacking, kept her face neutral, did the math. Ibundul alayo? Seung-hyun was beside her stall, casual, not looking at the men directly but tracking them the way predators tracked things, with his peripheral vision and his stillness. Anio, Joyce said. No. He took out his phone, said 3 words, put it away. 30 seconds later, the two men looked at something behind them and left. Joyce stood with a mangosteen in each hand. They were watching Jane, he said. Joyce set the mangosteens down carefully. Her hands stayed steady. Why? Because of me. No softening. I should have been more careful. If something happens to my daughter, nothing will happen to your daughter. The certainty in his voice was not the certainty of a man making a promise. It was the certainty of a man stating a fact he intended to manufacture. I will make sure of it. You don't get to just decide that, Joyce said. No, he agreed. You do. She hadn't expected that. Tell me what you need, and I will do it, he said. Or tell me to stay away, and I will. But I need you to choose, because Jane already chose, and I don't. His throat moved. I don't want to take something from her again. The market moved around them. A cart rattled past on the uneven stone. Joyce looked at Jane. Then she held out a mango. You always come here and never eat anything, she said. So eat. Then we talk. What neither of them knew yet was that the two men had already taken photographs. And the man who sent them, Park Tae-shik, running his distribution network out of Seogu, with the specific patience of someone who had been waiting for the Black Hawk to make exactly this kind of mistake. was already looking at those photographs and smiling. Park Tae-shik was not a loud man. That was what made him dangerous. Loud men announced their intentions. Loud men gave you time to prepare. Park Tae-shik operated in the quiet space between observation and action. And by the time you understood what he was doing, he was already 3 steps ahead of your response. He had been watching Kwon Seung-hyun for 11 months, mapping patterns, logging movements, building a picture of a man who had no visible weaknesses, no vices, no debts, no loyalties outside his organization that could be pulled and used. Until now. He passed the photographs to his lieutenant without a word. The lieutenant looked at them. A fruit stall. A black woman with a yellow and green head wrap, full-figured, working her stall with the ease of someone who had been doing it for years. A small, mixed child, with coily hair and a mango. And Kwon Seung-hyun, crouched to the ground, eye level with the child, his face doing something his face was never supposed to do in public. The lieutenant looked up. The child, Park Tae-shik said simply. That was the whole instruction. Seung-hyun found out on a Wednesday evening that someone had been asking questions around the market. Not obvious questions. The kind that came wrapped inside normal conversation. A vendor mentioning that a stranger had asked about the Ghanaian woman with the fruit stall, how long she'd been there, whether she had family nearby. Small questions. The kind that added up. He didn't tell Joyce that Wednesday. He spent Thursday putting people in the right places first. 2 men on her building in Donggu. 1 person inside the market from opening. A quiet conversation with the association head that rearranged certain access without explanation. By Friday, he was as prepared as he could be without alarming her. Park Tae-shik moved on Friday night anyway. 4 men to Joyce's building. The instruction was simple. Find the woman and the child, deliver a message, make it clear to the Blackhawk what he now had to lose. They found 2 of Seung-hyun's people waiting in the stairwell instead. Joyce was not there. Jane was not there. Jane was upstairs in the private dining room of the restaurant Seung-hyun used as his unofficial office, sitting across from Baek Do-jin, eating japchae with the focused appreciation of someone who took food seriously. She had been explaining her mango classification system for 20 minutes. Do-jin, who had coordinated operations across 3 districts for 9 years and had once negotiated a port settlement that prevented actual bloodshed, was listening with complete attention because he had learned in the first 5 minutes that this child expected to be taken seriously, and that the consequences of not doing so were social, immediate, and embarrassing. When Seung-hyun's phone rang and he stepped away from the table, Jane watched him go. She looked at Do-jin. He's worried. He's handling something. He does a thing with his jaw when he's worried. She pointed to her own jaw. He just did it. Do-jin looked at the door. Then he picked up his own phone and quietly verified the perimeter. Seung-hyun called Joyce before she heard it from anyone else. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had already felt something was wrong. Where is Jane? With Do-jin. She's eating. She's fine. Silence. Tell me, she said. He told her everything. Not a summary. Not a managed version. Everything, plainly, because that was the agreement they had made in the market over a mango. And he was not going to break it the first time it cost him something. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment. Then, come get me. I want to see my daughter. Joyce, it's handled. I'm not scared, she said, and the steadiness in her voice was not performance. It was bone deep. I'm angry. There's a difference. Come get me. She walked into that restaurant like she had built it. Heels on the floor, head up. The staff at the entrance had never seen her and stepped aside anyway, because there was something in the way Joyce Mensah moved when her child was involved that did not invite obstruction. Seung-hyun, one step behind her, thought, Ayoja. Jane saw her mother and left the chair without ceremony. Ioma! Joyce caught her and held her and pressed her face into Jane's coily hair and stood there with her eyes closed for 3 full seconds. Just breathing, just checking with her whole body that everything was where it was supposed to be. Then she looked at Seung-hyun over the top of Jane's head. You said nothing would happen to her. Nothing happened to her. Because you were ready. Yes. What happens when you're not ready? I will always be ready. He said it simply, not as reassurance, as fact. I will not pretend my world has no risk, but I will tell you what I am prepared to do, and then you decide if that is enough. Jane, still held against Joyce's chest, looked between them with the careful attention of a child reading a room she had been reading for weeks. Iyama, she said softly. He was worried about us. Joyce looked at her daughter, at this small, precise person she had carried from Accra to Busan, on nothing but determination and love. Then she looked at Seung-hyun. Sit down, she said. We need to talk about Park Tae-shik. It was 3 weeks later, on a bright, cold morning at the stall, that Jane grabbed Seung-hyun's hand and pulled him toward a stray cat that had appeared near the storage crates. Appa, look, she has babies. She was pointing, vibrating, not looking at him. He stopped breathing. She hadn't checked what she'd called him. It had come out of her the way true things came out of children, before the thinking, ahead of the deciding. Joyce, 3 feet away, went completely still. Jane crouched beside the cat. She's protecting them even when they're sleeping. She's still watching. She looked up at him, open, unbothered. That's what good appas do, right? Something in him gave way, not loudly, just finally. Nay, he said. That's exactly right. He told Joyce about Ha-yun on a gray morning before the market opened. Not planned, not prepared. It came out of a silence that had grown heavy enough to need filling. The two of them sitting on crates in the empty stall while the city woke up around them and Jane was still at home sleeping. He said it the same way he said everything. Plainly. Her name first, then her age, then the fever, then the corridor where he stood with his back against the wall so nobody could see his face. Joyce listened without interrupting. She didn't offer the usual words people reached for when they needed to close a subject. She set down what she was holding and turned to face him and let the silence after be full instead of empty. She would have been 6 this year, he said. The same as Jane. Yes. Joyce studied his face. Is that why? No. Certain. Immediate. It's why I stopped that day. But it's not why I stayed. He paused. I stayed because Jane is Jane. There is nobody else like her. I know, Joyce said quietly. And I stayed because of you. She held his gaze without flinching. I'm not easy. I know. I don't trust fast. I don't bend. And I will never let Jane become someone's replacement. If you ever, she is not Ha-eun. Firm, clear, final. She is Jane Kim. That is a full thing on its own. I know the difference. Joyce looked at him for a long time. The morning light was flat and gray and honest, and there was nowhere in it to hide anything. Okay, she said. Okay? She turned back to her crates. I said, okay. Don't make me say it again. He sat there. Something settled in him that had not been settled in a very long time. Jane's 7th birthday arrived on a Saturday. Joyce made jollof rice that filled the whole apartment building with the kind of smell that made neighbors find reasons to be in the hallway. Seung-hyun arrived with a cake in a white box, said nothing about the fact that it had taken him 4 attempts to find the right one, and set it on the table like it was routine. Dojin arrived 12 minutes later with balloons, uninvited, because Jane had mentioned her birthday near him 3 separate times and he had processed this correctly. The apartment was small. The chairs didn't match. The window looked out onto a narrow Busan street where a fish seller was having a loud disagreement with a delivery driver. None of it was the kind of setting that fit Kwon Seung-hyun in any recognizable way, and he sat at that table in his dark coat, eating jollof rice like a man who had finally stopped needing things to fit. Jane blew out 7 candles with her whole face, cheeks puffed, eyes pressed shut, utterly committed. "Tell us the wish," Dojin said. "If you tell it, it doesn't come true." "That's not a real Dojin Abba." She looked at him. "It's my birthday." He closed his mouth. Seung-hyun caught Joyce's eye across the table. Something passed between them. Amusement first, and underneath it something warmer that neither of them had named yet out loud. Joyce looked away first, but the corner of her mouth moved. Later, after the cake, after Dojin left, Jane climbed into Seung-hyun's lap on the couch without announcement and laid her head against his chest like this was something she had always done and always would. "Appa, I wished for us to always be like this." His hand, the hand that had signed documents that ended men's livelihoods, that had built an organization on precision and controlled fear, settled carefully against the back of her head, against her coily hair and her yellow rubber bands. He didn't speak. Joyce stood in the kitchen doorway and watched this and did not interrupt it and thought, "I didn't plan for this." And then honestly, because she had never been a woman who lied to herself, "I'm not sorry." Park Tae-shik was dealt with quietly the following week. Seung-hyun did not explain the details. Joyce did not ask for them. But on the evening he told her it was handled, he also told her the part that wasn't. A lieutenant named Shin had been present for every instruction, had seen the photographs, had looked at Jane's face, and 3 days before the operation concluded, Shin had relocated to Daegu quietly, which was either coincidence or calculation, and men like Shin did not do things by coincidence. Joyce stood very still when he told her this. "So it's never fully over," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." She nodded once, the way she nodded when she was accepting a weight and adjusting her posture for it. "Then I need to know everything. Not summaries. Not what you think I can handle. Everything. Because if my daughter is in this world now, I will not walk through it half blind." "Joyce, that is not a negotiation," she said. He looked at her. At this woman who had come from Accra to Busan on love alone, been left, stayed anyway, built something from a borrowed crate, and 7 years of stubbornness, and was now standing in her kitchen on her daughter's birthday, telling the most dangerous man in the district exactly what she required from him. "All right," he said. She didn't sleep well that night, but somewhere in Daegu, a man named Shin still had photographs in a folder on his phone, and that folder still had Jane's face in it. She wasn't the only one not sleeping. Seung-hyun sat in his office that night with the lights low and the city noise coming through the window and thought about Shin, the way you thought about a loose wire near something valuable. Not panicking, but not looking away either. Shin knew the stall, knew the building in Donggu, knew Jane's face and Joyce's routine, and the specific hours when the market was loud enough to cover things. He made 3 calls before midnight. Then he sat back and thought about Jane's wish. Us. Always like this. He hadn't told her that always was a complicated word in his world, that always required maintenance, vigilance, the kind of permanent attention that left marks on a man over time. He hadn't told her because she was 7 and it was her birthday, and some truths had correct timing. But he had heard it, and he had felt it land somewhere permanent inside him. The following evening, he went to the market late, after closing, when the vendors were stacking their last crates and the stone underfoot was wet from the cleaning crew. Joyce was still there. She was always last to leave, checking inventory, restacking what the day had disturbed. Jane was sitting on her crate under the single working light at the back of the stall, asleep, genuinely asleep, her cheek pressed against her arm and her mouth slightly open, worn completely out by the business of being 7. Seung-hyun stood there looking at her. He took off his coat and laid it over her small shoulders without waking her. It swallowed her completely. Just her face and her coily puffs and the yellow rubber bands visible above the dark fabric. He stayed standing there. Joyce came and stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The market was quiet, the way it was only ever quiet after hours. A specific stillness that felt earned rather than empty. Then it came out of him. Not planned, not constructed. It came the way the true things always came. Before the thinking, ahead of the deciding. "Saranghaeyo," he said, quietly. Not a declaration aimed anywhere specific. Not a performance for Joyce or for himself. Just a true thing, said in the presence of the person who had made it true. At the end of a day in a fruit market in Busan. By a man who had not said those words in 2 years and had not expected to say them again. Joyce looked at him. He was still looking at Jane. "I know," Joyce said softly. In English, because some things she still said in English because Korean didn't carry them correctly. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at their hands, then up at her face. Everything between them that had been building since a Tuesday morning with a mangosteen in each hand and 2 strangers watching her stall. All of it was present in that look, without needing to be explained or rushed or named before it was ready. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. 30 seconds later, Jane opened her eyes, because Jane Kim could not miss things. Not butterflies, not cats with kittens, not moments that mattered. She woke up and looked at her mother's hand, in Seung-hyun's hand, and looked at both their faces and nodded once with the satisfied certainty of someone whose plan had always been exactly this and had now arrived on schedule. "I knew," she said. "You were asleep," Joyce said. "I was resting my eyes." She climbed off the crate and pulled his coat around her small shoulders like a cape, holding it closed at the front with both hands. It reached the ground. She looked like she was wearing a building. "Ya, Jane Kim," Seung-hyun said. Appa?" He crouched down in front of her. The same way he had crouched in the same market on the first morning when she was sitting on a crate with mango juice on her elbow and he had been a man with nothing soft left in him. He looked at her face, at her warm brown skin and her freckles and her full lips and the gap between her front teeth. "Saranghae," he said. "I love you. Please be my daughter." Not a question this time. Not the uncertain, careful request of a man testing unfamiliar ground. A declaration, full, unhiding. Jane looked at him for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes. Then she put both arms around his neck and held on. "I already am," she said into his shoulder. "I decided that the first day." Joyce pressed her hand over her mouth. Seung-hyun closed his eyes and held this child, this small, impossible, clear-eyed child who had walked up to the most feared man in Busan and handed him a piece of mango and changed everything. And he held her the way he had held nothing in 2 years, like he was never letting go. Like that was the simplest decision he had ever made. Joyce watched them, the wet market stones, the single working light. Her daughter wrapped in a coat 3 times her size, held by a man who had crouched down and asked for something he had no right to ask for and somehow been given it anyway. She thought about Shin in Daegu with his photographs. She thought about the weight she had accepted on a birthday evening in her small kitchen. She thought, this will not always be easy. There will be nights like the one that just passed, and calls she doesn't want to receive, and a world she stepped into with full knowledge of what it cost. And then Jane laughed at something, that full, unguarded laugh that filled whatever room it was in, and the thought finished itself simply. It's worth it.
Jane was 6 years old when she walked up to the most feared man in Busan and handed him a piece of mango. She didn't know who he was. She didn't care. She just saw a sad person and did what her mother taught her to do. And somehow, that one small act cracked open a man who had spent 2 years making sure nothing could. No grand gesture, no perfect moment, just a child who decided and meant it. If this story moved you even a little, drop a comment and tell me, what did Jane teach you today? Because honestly, I think we all need a little bit of her in us. The kind of courage that doesn't look like courage. The kind that just walks up, holds out a mango and says, I see you, and if you are new here, welcome. This is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Real emotion, real stakes, real people finding each other in the most unexpected places. Like this video, if Jane got to you, subscribe so you will be notified whenever we upload new video. And tell me in the comments, whose side are you on? Joyce playing it safe? Or Jane who already decided from day one? I genuinely want to know.